Hello and welcome to New Consciousness Activation. Today we welcome Dr. Friedemann Schaub. Dr. Schaub, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and you are a molecular biologist and a physician. I believe your focus is on cardiology.
Right.
And you are an author of Fear and Anxiety Solution. Would you like to add anything else to that brief introduction? I'm sure there's tons to tell about you.
I mean, there are lots of things that I enjoy doing, such as, I am a master hypnotherapist and a neurolinguistic program practitioner and timeline therapy practitioner. But that was kind of my third life. So, I guess it started with being in cardiology and then went to molecular biology, and then my real interest in the subconscious and the mind-body healing and the emotions just got me then onto that path that I'm on since the last, 15 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so your focus right now is on fear and anxiety, which is kind of an interesting focus. So let's start with that. Let's talk about fear first. Can you tell us, how would you define fear? What is fear in people and why they have it?
It's interesting because I don't really distinguish so much between fear and anxiety for two reasons. One is that people often mix it up, and there is, even though there is, a definition that says fear is more something, specific that we are afraid of, like the fear of flying, the fear of failure, the fear of loss, and anxiety is more that gloom and doom of the unknown. But there are many people that said, I'm afraid of the future, I'm afraid of change. And so I think in general, since it comes from the same place, which is the subconscious, I think we also have to see them as, cousins or half sisters or something like that. But it's definitely something very related to each other.
Right, and yeah, I usually think of fear, of anxiety as sort of the fear of the future. It's the projection, this anticipation of something that's going to happen to you, and fear is more about maybe the present or thinking about the past. So what are some of the common fears that you see people have? Are there some that sort of stand out as patterns that keep reoccurring?
I think with fear, it's it's almost like a tree. You can see the different symptoms of fears. Fearful of getting fired, or getting, not my debt paid off, or I'm fearful of my husband cheating, or whatever those things are. But when it really comes down to it, and when you are asking a little bit about, so what is really underneath that fear, that specific fear, and was there maybe, similar fear before, just with a different maybe trigger or a different situation, different person, it often comes down to the fear of not being good enough, and that fear of not belonging and not fitting in, and that fear of not being lovable. I mean, there are like these three fears that I see over and over again, and they just can really affect your entire life.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I think about fear, to me, and I look at it sort of from a I guess spiritual perspective, and I know that you're very open to that. If we see ourselves as spirit, right, and we are like genies in a bottle, we are these huge, powerful beings that come in and sort of fit ourselves into tiny little space, and we forget our power. And so to me, fear is that perception of limitations where we don't remember who we are, and from that we begin to perceive ourselves as not lovable, all the things that you named. So does that resonate with you? Is that kind of your perception?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the thing is that the forgetting is certainly a big root, which I agree with. However, remembering is often not enough, because you have that belief that you're not good enough, or that you are not safe in the world. Once that fear is there, it usually finds a lot of reasons why that is true. which is with all of those fears and beliefs, just
Right.
what happens, self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right.
So even though you would say, oh, wow, now I remember I'm this amazing, unlimited spirit. Well, yes, but I got bullied here and I got betrayed there. And my mom always told me I'm not pretty. And I mean, there are many things that just are happening in a lifetime that we have to address. Confusions. This is not the truth, but these are confusions. Because I think when it comes to this unlimited potential, yes, there is a forgetting, and maybe that's what life is about, for us to remember. But there is also a lot of confusion and a lot of open questions that on the way need to be asked. So, for example, why did my mother do this? Or why did my parents, for example, tell me that I'm not smart? And what was really behind it? Was it a fact, or was it their fear? Was it something they saw in me, or was it something they projected upon me? And so there are all these little things that I love to work with, because it also gives you, each time you answer a question, a new insight about yourself and ultimately about life. And so it doesn't have to be complicated, but it can be interesting to address the root causes of fears.
Absolutely. And I think when you're talking about remembering, I absolutely agree with you that we can remember and still not, get over our fears.
No.
But I think that level of remembering is sort of just sort of on a technical level, like it's our awareness, but it's not really on a visceral level. Because I think when we truly embody that, when we remember, not in a sense sort of with our brain, but really with our body, that can, that's where spontaneous remission happens. That's when healing, and so that can really make a tremendous difference. I think that can, that level of remembering, not just, with our brain.
Right.
I think most of us, that's where we start. We kind of begin to say, well, yes, I know I'm more than this, but we're still struggling, with all of the issues. So how do you work with people? And well, let me just first ask you this. Do you find that fear is something that is only some people experience, or is it a very common kind of occurrence?
I think everyone has the ability to feel emotions, all of the emotions, including fear, including anxiety, guilt, shame. I mean, that's just a beauty about being alive, that we can feel this. And, when you talk about the unlimited spirit experience, which is also an experience of unity, the beauty about life is that we are feeling separation all the time, and we are feeling the contrast. It's also something that, why are we seeking for anything if we are not feeling the hunger and thirst to, be quenched? And so if we don't feel contrast, if we don't feel fear, we're not looking for peace. If we don't feel anxiety, we are not looking for a sense of trust or safety, or, maybe it's about letting go and surrendering. I mean, all of those quote unquote negative emotions have also that purpose to make us ultimately expand, not only heal, but really expand and find what's beyond it. I often say it's like physical pain. Physical pain has a purpose. Physical pain is there to tell us, first of all, that, well, there is a problem. You have a broken foot, a cavity, or, maybe an inflamed bowel. But then the deeper issue is, well, what about your lifestyle? What about your, being in balance? Is there a time for you to do something about that? And so, we can see these little alarm signals or warning lamps, like on a dashboard in a car, as signs of, well, you need to come back to a different path, a new sense of wholeness. You need to make some choices. And that's ultimately what fear and anxiety really does tell us. Make a different choice. You're disconnected from yourself. I think it's very often that people are disconnected from their spirit, disconnected from their truth. And the further they are disconnected, the more anxious they are. And that's why I think now so many people struggle with fear and anxiety, because there is not that searching for the truth. There is a searching for, being meaningful in regards to, yes, I'm someone on social media. I am important because I have this and that accomplishment or this and that car. And, the external identifications are so much more important than maybe 50 years ago, where it was much smaller life and your circle of influence was much more, limited. I mean, I'm working with people that do have a very, strong following and a certain kind of fame, but they are absolutely anxious because without that kind of recognition, they feel completely lost. So they only can feel themselves in what they are seen as, but not really what they feel or know they are. And so, this is something we have to really see when fear and anxiety comes up. It's not about there's externally a problem. Most of the times there isn't. It's really something that's inside of us that's out of whack and it needs to be addressed.
Right. And so what I'm hearing you say is that fear can be really in a way a friend, because it's something within you that sends you a signal. It's a communication that we can interpret. It's and in a way, if we give it a voice, then it could be your protector, because it's doing something internally that it feels will probably keep you safe. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And safety is such an interesting word because, let's say fear and anxiety do come from the subconscious, and the subconscious has one major, or two, but let's say one of the major agendas of the subconscious is to keep us safe. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, of course, fear and anxiety are a safety mechanism, are an inner compass, are, friends and allies, you could say. But, safety can come from just going into the survival pattern, which a lot of people do then. And they say, okay, I'm anxious, so my survival mode is to hide out or to please other people or to be always perfect or whatever it is, So there is a lot of survival. And you have a false sense of safety because it's a conditional sense of safety. Only if those situations are exactly the way I want them to be, I'm feeling safe. Or there is an inner safety. And that's the inner safety where you'll find yourself, that no matter what, you have trust and confidence in yourself. And, if you have spiritual inclinations, you have trust and confidence in a higher power. And so you just know I'm on the journey of life and stuff happens. I can still be in a very trusting and positive place. And that's more an inner safety. Now, this anxiety doesn't tell you which way to go. Anxiety just tells you, okay, that feels good or that doesn't feel good. And if you do survival pattern, one of the things that especially if you do the avoider pattern, that you avoid more and more. Your life gets smaller and smaller. The comfort zone gets tiny at some point. And so the anxiety just comes back and say, well, it felt good for 5 minutes, but now I'm still feeling anxious. And then it just keeps on, nudging you until you, with the free will, choose another path. And that's the path that I think you and your work are offering people. That's what I'm offering people. And certainly a path that finds ultimately a greater sense of healing inside of you because you find yourself. And that's what I'm always looking forward to when I'm working with someone.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of Brené Brown's work, and I know you're familiar with her. She does research into fear and vulnerability, and I really respect her research. Now, it's interesting that she found that that the path, that strength is not found in avoiding fear or overcome, it's in dealing with fear, but the strength is found actually in finding vulnerability and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And so her path is from self-acceptance towards courage that lies in allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So I wonder, can you kind of relate to that and talk about that?
Well, I don't like the word vulnerability because it's a complete, I think it's associated with just some very kind of negative interpretations. When we're saying vulnerable, yes, I'm totally fine being on my back, completely open. People can stab me, but I'm still okay. And I don't think vulnerable is really that. I think vulnerable is more a sense of authenticity,
right. Right, absolutely.
True to yourself and being true to your emotions. You know, yesterday I talked to a client who is a lawyer, and he has a young colleague, and you know, he has basically some issues about negotiations with salary. But the
Mm-hmm.
true issue was really that he felt betrayed because this young fellow that he really saw more like his son all of a sudden made these huge demands. And so I suggested to him not just looking at numbers, but really being open and authentic with what he felt, his
Mm-hmm.
disappointment, and you know, his future vision, and how he was excited to start working with him, and then save the relationship, or at least give an attempt to save the relationship. Because if he only would have stayed with the numbers, he would have just automatically shut down. You know, he would have not
Mm-hmm.
felt close. He would have maybe found a contract that both can sign, but there would not be necessarily that closeness that he felt before. And that's a form of vulnerability, truthfulness, you know, sharing what you really feel, sharing what's really going inside of you. And of course, there is the risk, if it's a risk, but there is a risk of getting judged. There is a risk of getting rejected. There is a risk of getting disappointed. But it's not about what other people really do when you're open and authentic. It's about what it feels to you to have that ownership of, this is who I am, take it or leave it. This is my choice to no longer hide or contract or anything like that. And I believe this is more powerful because you have more access to everything that's inside of you. I mean, how many people are geniuses and will never be discovered because they're hiding out? I
Mm-hmm.
bet there are people that could save the world, but they're like somewhere sitting in their, you know, little room and behind the computer, have already figured everything out, but they're too shy to go out. And so if we all would just be able to say, this is my contribution, my light, my wisdom, my gift, that is vulnerability at its best, because
Absolutely.
you do tap into everything that's really inside of you, not in your head, because that's a very limited space, but really in your truth. And that's something that I find is way more powerful than the word vulnerability really describes. I think it's just this, you know, authentic, true self that we hopefully all try to strive for.
Absolutely, and I think that's exactly what really she is trying to describe with her work. Maybe and the word does have has traditionally had sort of more
Yeah.
negative connotations, but but that kind of a authentic ability to be authentic with yourself, that takes great courage, because we are dealing with a lot of fears around that. Because I think many of us, or probably all of us, go through certain fears as we reach that authentic place. Do you find that, or are there people who kind of are very comfortable in their authentic truth, you know,
I
from
think
the
there are people
start?
that are very comfortable, and that has a lot to do also with their upbringing, because
Mm-hmm.
often this kind of authenticity was encouraged. And
Mm-hmm.
so there were not, you know, like these expectations or pressure or imprints. And others, which I find surprising, are often the ones that were neglected and that basically had early on in their life to figure out who they are because nobody
Mm-hmm.
told them who they are. The advantage is that they never had to be deprogrammed from all these, you know, old ideas of who they are supposed to be. The disadvantage is, of course, they are often missing the sense of belonging or a sense of being really cared for. But those people often are really just true to themselves. And we know true to ourselves, we have to keep in mind there is not the moment where, okay, now that happened and now I'm true to myself for the rest of my life. I think it's always an evolution. It's
Mm-hmm.
always, you know, new situations come along and you wonder, oh, can I be true to myself here or there? And, you know, it's, I still don't know who I am. I still discover more and more. And I don't want to know yet who I am because I got to save this for the last breath, I hope. But there, so I think we have to also be really curious and open to figure out more. But
Mm-hmm.
about this openness, what I think is so important, you said courage, because
Mm-hmm.
what are we really afraid of is the other people. What we're really afraid of is that we are not getting accepted, that we're not getting, you know, embraced for that. So we're keeping ourselves to that most common denominator where everyone kind of, you know, says, oh yeah, he's a good chap. But that's not necessarily fulfilling. And so that was my past too, you know, a family of doctors. So it was clear that I have to be a doctor too. And that was not my authentic self. and through a lot of pain and suffering. At some point, it wasn't really taking courage. It was more like taking, having the awareness that this is not working. And this is again where fear and anxiety came in, because I woke up one day, like, in my 6th year or so in cardiology, with a panic attack. I mean, really full on panic attack. And I didn't really know what it was about. And then I heard this voice inside of me that said, is that really how you want to live for the next 35 years? Is that really your path? I mean, I was like stunned to hear that. I mean, and then I thought about, oh shoot, next 35 years, that sounds terrible. And that's when the seed was planted to say, no, this pain of having to be like this in a non-authentic way is greater than any fear of getting, my parents being disappointed, my colleagues shaking their heads, the future being not very secure, unknown. All of that didn't matter. So there was something about also the awareness of what is inside of me, what causes me suffering, that was way more important to address than making sure that everyone is okay with me. So we have to be also, really in a positive way, selfish in this regard, and say, no, this is really, yes, I can please everyone. Yes, I can make everyone proud. But if I am not happy, it's not worth it. And so then it doesn't really require courage as much as it requires just the awareness and the willingness to take action and follow that yearning, that longing inside to find what really is in resonance with you.
Well, I think I agree with you, but I think courage is in the way that to actually honor your needs and honor your what's authentic for you. That's in true. The face, of dealing with people around you, in the face of the expectations that are there, for you. And for you, It was, let's say, your family, your parents, and the expectations. So for you to stand up and say, but I'm going to follow what's important for me, I think that does take certain, courage, sort of internal readiness to really stand up for yourself. And I think that's something that many people find difficult to really, first of all, find out what's true and authentic for them, and to then really do something about it, kind of follow their bliss, I guess.
But that's where fear and anxiety comes in, right? I mean, absolutely. When we fear and anxiety, and right. Of course, if we are taking only medication to suppress it, we don't necessarily follow any other lead of what it may tell us. But right. If we're really noticing what causes and what triggers the fear and anxiety, and what are the thoughts that are coming with the fear and anxiety, then we can actually find out, okay, what is really not working? Where are we running in circles? What is another direction to go? But with courage, it's interesting. I'm seeing all these amazing stories about the Hurricane Harvey, and people, just helping each other and supporting each other. And they don't ask, is this dangerous? Is this something that can cost my life? They just do it. And that's what I find about courage. Once you do something that takes courage, but you just do it, maybe looking back, you say, oh yeah, that was courageous. But in the moment, you're not saying, oh, I am courageous. It's just there, it's just, right. There's just an impulse or an energy there that carries you forward. And often people tell me, oh, you're courageous. You changed your career. So it didn't feel courageous. It just felt that's a necessity. That's what I got to do. And I think that's what you see with these helpers too. They just know this is what I got to do. This is not about, courageous being in the midst of, this disaster. This is just a need. And I think when we reach that need to change or need to go to a different path, then the courage will be there. But it will not feel like, oh, I'm going into a battle zone. It will just feel like, okay, I'm moving, and exciting. It's a very exciting time to have that, fulfill that need, and just to go sometimes also, of course, into the unknown. But something inside of you will shine the light and will shine the path. I mean, that's at least my experience.
Right. And so you're then suggesting that we actually pay attention and kind of almost have a conversation with ourselves, or start paying attention to where the fear or anxiety is coming from, to begin that exploration.
Definitely.
Is that correct?
What I think we have to understand is with our mind that, let's say there are three parts of our mind. There is the conscious mind, there is a subconscious mind, and then there is a higher consciousness. Let's say the higher consciousness is that spirit that you talk about, to simplify it. And let's say the subconscious is in the middle. It's like, the translator. And the conscious mind is basically the one that is, on the one hand, the receiver. We get all the time information from the subconscious, not only in our dreams, but also, of course, with our spontaneous bubbling up thoughts or emotions, things like that. So the subconscious talks. We just don't necessarily always pay attention. But the beauty is we can talk back. And that's where the conscious mind can often help the subconscious mind, which sometimes is described as, the level of evolution of a child, which is not totally true, but I believe there is a programming, or there is something in the subconscious mind that just has started early in our lives, especially these survival patterns, that the subconscious mind needs to be guided out of. It needs a mentor who shows, okay, you didn't know about your higher self maybe when you were a child, or you didn't know about your abilities, or you didn't know that the world is actually a safe and positive place. You didn't even know that you couldn't make a difference when you were that little, and this is why you were hiding out. But now that's the conscious mind talking to the subconscious. Now or I know, we have a lot of things to offer. We have a lot of support to rely on. It's just these inner dialogues from the conscious to the subconscious, which always involves some kind of compassionate attitude. It's very, very effective. Your subconscious loves to learn, loves to listen, loves to also not have to suffer in anxiety and fear, but it needs someone who takes the reins. So this is where the whole, ideology of the free will comes in. Living in a free will universe, in a free will body, that's a conscious free will we have. And we can choose how we want to have our life, work out, but we cannot just do it with our will. We have to have the subconscious in alignment with that, and we have to draw upon that strength and wisdom of the higher consciousness in order to really come to, the greatest sense of integration and resonance that we can have. So all three parts of the mind need to be connected. Unfortunately, in our time and day, we are 90% in our heads, and we are not really paying attention to the subconscious. And many people don't pay attention to their spirit or higher consciousness at all. I mean, this is something that just I think there is a resurgence. Of course, there is a desire for meaning, but for quite some time, I think there was just this idea of, if I can think it, if I can figure it out, it's good. If not, it doesn't exist to me. I don't really want to spend time on it. And that's, I think, gets us in these circular loops where we just do the same detour over and over again, feeling like we're never really evolving.
Right. So I liked one of the words that you used, a mentor, that you have to be a mentor to those subconscious patterns that are coming up. And I use that a lot with my clients. I use the word, a friend, a parent, a mentor, all of those things that are kind of a little bit wiser than who you're, maybe, or has a little bit more knowledge than who you're working with. So what I find with my own fears, so in my own personal experience, is when there are patterns that come up and it's almost independent of me. So it's almost, there is a program running in the back. And when a certain situation arises, there is a response that comes up, and it's not a response that I would consciously, choose to have, but it's almost like a trained, sort of a trained automatic response. And so I have to be a mentor to myself and talk it down and say, but talk it down with acceptance, that I accepted, and we're going to do it a little bit differently, or we're going to do it anyway, whatever it is. But so what I've learned is that I have to distance myself from, or, look at it from, I can't be immersed in the fear. I have to sort of separate and become the mentor to it. Exactly. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, it's really the relationship of an adult and a child. Right. I mean, if you have a child have a temper tantrum, or be afraid of a thunderstorm. I mean, of course, you want to have compassion for the child, but you don't want to take on its fears or believe in its, beliefs. So you just have to have a certain kind of separation. The bond is still love and compassion, but that emotion is something that you want to comfort and reassure, and not to absorb like a sponge, because that's what many people do. They feel, oh, now I have this negative self-talk, or I have this, fearful mindset, and they don't know that they can actually separate themselves. They don't know that it's not really a statement. Oh, this is true. Thunderstorms are bad. Or yes, this is true. People don't like you. It's a question. It's a question. Are thunderstorms bad? Are people nice? Am I okay? And so you can then, from the mentor role, answer the question. It's a much easier way to deal with negative self-talk if you just put it in question form, because then you know what to do. Then if you take it as statements and you have this inner debating club then that you feel like you have to get into. So, if you see I'm anxious, so something inside of me is wondering about ... safety, lovability, belonging, whatever. And then you answer, yes, of course. Yes, this person may right now be miffed, but doesn't have to be about us. It can be an indigestion. Maybe their hamster died, or who knows? It's not necessarily something and even if the person may be right now somehow having negative thoughts about us, I have a good conscience. We did the best we could. Let's find out what it could be, but let's not take it personally, because as we know, that's one of those really important rules of life. We all have to really, somehow adopt and take in that most perception is projection. Most of what people see in us is not what we are. It's what they see through their filters. It's their projection. And it's so, once you really believe it and take it on, you see it all the time. You see all the time where people are just, my sister is a great example. She does this all the time. And so you hear her saying something that I know, it really takes me aback. And then I think, oh, wow, this is exactly how she feels right now. But because she doesn't necessarily want to be in that place alone, she makes a statement as if it is, both of us, or it is me. And I understand that, because sometimes, when you're miserable in a certain situation, you want company. You don't want to be in it alone. And that's where all projections happen.
Right. So, yeah, you just mentioned perceptions, and I was thinking when you were talking about turning statements into questions, that it really, the underlying thought is that then it's really you're challenging your perceptions, and then really everything that we may experience, fear or anxiety, then it's not really a statement about the world or a statement of fact. It's really all subjective, that we can begin to question our perceptions, and then after that we can begin to shift them just by turning it from the sort of statement makes it very solid, this is the way it is, and a question makes it shiftable, changeable.
Oh, absolutely. And then also it shows the vulnerability, in that case real vulnerability, in regards to I'm feeling small, I'm feeling weak, I'm feeling scared of that subconscious part. And if you see that question and you're even imagining like a child having this little high-pitched voice and having this, energy of scaredness, I mean, your heart opens up. You feel like, of course I want to take care of my little anxiety. I don't have to be afraid of my own emotions. Of course I need to be compassionate with that aspect of myself. So, these just mind shifts shift also your relationship to your emotions. And I think it's a very effective way just to also address those emotions, as I said, from the heart and not just from the head. But, perception is just, it's such a relative thing, which is, of course, we have so many just details in life that can bombard us at any moment. We have to have certain filters in order to just focus on what we want to focus on. But unfortunately, we don't necessarily choose what we want to focus on consciously. This is, again, where the mentor role comes in. I was told I'm, maybe not good enough or effective enough. So all I could see is what I didn't get done. And I couldn't see the things that I did get done. And so it's, I'm having, there was a class that I took a long time ago, and basically it was about public speaking, and then the people were giving you grades at the end of it, and 50 people were in there, 49 said wonderful thing, one person said something negative. Of course, that's the person that I remember. All the others, no, what they said, but that's the person that, oh yeah, oh my God. And so the whole, event was somehow clouded by someone's opinion that, could have been totally outdone by all the other people. But that's why we do. That's our perception. We blow stuff up, we delete other stuff, we generalize. And so whatever we see, we just have to also be willing to say, well, if I have a judgment about someone else, it's probably also just my projection. It has a lot to do with me and very little with that person. Vice versa, of course, as I said before, true as well. It's a kind of a humbling way of looking at life, I think, because we can never really be sure that we are right. It's like, we just have to always have this kind of question mark behind it. Well, the way I see it, but it's not necessarily the truth.
Yeah, that's a very powerful way, I think, to approach life. The way I see it, or even the way I see it at the moment.
Exactly.
Joe Dispenza uses this phrase. He says, "In my current state of ignorance."
Yes.
Meaning that, you hopefully we're all, becoming wiser by the minute, but in our current state of ignorance, that's kind of how we see reality.
Yeah. And that's really, I think that's the thing about what you said, becoming wiser. That is really the journey of life. And it can be quite exhausting because we are often really, because we are living in a life where there are so many facts presented to us as facts, and this is how things are, and this is how it's supposed to be, and I think we have to always sift through it and really try to find then our truth that would resonate with us. And that's why I can only say, we have to really adopt a committed relationship to meditation, because that's the really most effective way just to close ourselves out of all these external influences and tune back in with oneself. This is the goal for me for meditation is not just to be present in the moment, it's really being present with my truth. Ultimately, I want to feel myself. I want to remember, oh, that's my center of gravity, that's my inner compass, that is where I live and feel and sense and act from, and we often just don't feel this anymore. We lose touch with that. So spending a few minutes every day to recenter yourself, I think that makes a huge difference also when it comes to fear and anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about self-acceptance. I know that's sort of the foundation of your work, learning to love yourself, accept yourself. Can you talk about why that's important and how that affects, the fear that we can experience?
I think when you just look at a family dynamic, for example, if you are married to someone you cannot accept, or you feel as a child your parents don't accept you, there is a disharmony there, there's conflict, there is a sense of I don't want to be here. And that's the same with your relationship to yourself. If you have a relationship with yourself that is not based on self-acceptance, but more self-criticism or self-rejection, you're constantly living in disharmony. You're constantly not wanting to be with you. And, you're the only one you're going to be with the whole time. We kind of overlook that this is it. This is the most important relationship. There is nothing more important than that. And so that's kind of the foundation. Of course, there are many things about self-acceptance that are healing. It's not just that we are going more into this harmonious state, but there is also the parasympathetic nervous system that gets activated, which is ultimately the healing, balancing part of the autonomic nervous system. So it's something that's the opposite of the stress nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system. So that's kind of a physiological level. I also believe when we are accepting of ourselves, and we are not fighting ourselves. We are much more of service to others because we actually have something to give. We are not just a rattled little person who basically is just constantly bickering with oneself. We are actually at a peaceful place where we can sort out what's my contribution, what difference can I make. I mean, there are a lot of ripple effects, but when it comes down to it, self-acceptance is also the gateway to self-discovery. When you know that, yes, there are a lot of, let's say, ignorant things about me, or there are a lot of still fears that I deal with, and there's still shame and things that I'm hiding, but I'm accepting this right now as my starting point. And I want to find out more on how to heal this, or I want to find out more on what's behind it, or I want to find out more what else is there for me that I can actually find, strength in. That is self-acceptance leads you then beyond just that what you felt was flawed and you tried to ignore it or tried to compensate for. Self-acceptance says, okay, this is it. That's a table. There's all this stuff on there, and I'm going to choose now to discover more. What is good? What is edible? What can I enjoy? What do I want to, just maybe integrate or maybe recycle? That's a choice. So acceptance is not necessarily a rolling over and saying, oh, okay, I'm accepting myself. I'm a bad person, but so what? That's not necessarily, it's not about being stagnant when you're accepting. This is not complacency. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, and that's exactly, yes, I'm glad you made the distinction. It's not about saying, oh, well, I'm just going to suffer through it the rest of my life.
Right.
And to me, acceptance is that journey you mentioned before, the separation and unity. And so I think when we're trying to blame those parts of ourselves, well, I have this fear and I am stupid for having it and I wish I wouldn't have it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of functioning in or thinking about it in terms of separation, where you identify that one part of you and you just want to surgically remove it or get rid of it. It's bad. Whereas acceptance allows us to create that state of unity, which is already that open-hearted state from which we can create greater things, and integration is part of it. But again, we're incorporating it to transmute it, to make it into something better, not to keep it there and say, well, I'm afraid, I'm always going to be afraid, but I accept it, so
well, this is part of exactly what you just said about integration. There is this process, parts integration process in the book, The Fear and Anxiety Solution, which is really nice because it does exactly that. It lets you have first a compassionate and accepting look at the part of you that is anxious or feels insecure, but then you're also seeing the real gifts and treasures of that part, and you're able to transmute it from that, oh, you're the one who always makes me feel bad, to, oh, wow, you're the one who, depends on what you find there, but often it's like, oh, you're the one who actually has an emotional awareness. You're the one who is sensitive. You're the one who can actually go into the intuitive part of the mind, or you're the one who has, psychic abilities, or it's very interesting to see that this little mask of anxiety often covers up some wonderful gifts that once that part of you feels safe can also come to fruition, can really come out. And so getting rid of a part of us is always a terrible idea, but there are really like methods that even, suggest that. Take a part of you and bury it, get rid of it. And you feel fragmented. I mean, if you get rid of a part of you, it's like, get rid of your left foot and feel like you can still run. You can't. I mean, it's, well, anyhow, so it's definitely better to go into that searching for unity and searching for integration.
Yes, beautiful. So you mentioned at the beginning one of there are 3 or 4, I think, foundational fears that you kind of, reduce things to. And they're basically about self-love, acceptance, and know, are you lovable, right? Or am I lovable? Am I good enough? So I'd like to go to that because, again, yes, that's many of us feel that. And so I believe you work with people to help them learn to really love themselves. Now, in our society, we've been mostly conditioned to be self-deprecating and never to say I love myself, because there is a negative connotation to that you're either selfish or you don't care about others. So there's definitely a challenge, and many people face challenge in learning and turning that around.
Right.
So can you talk about that, in that process and what you do?
Well, I think, self-love starts basically with self-acceptance, as we said. This is kind of the gateway. And many people that I'm working with, they have a hard time to find any kind of self-acceptance or compassion for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But when they go into the work with the inner child, for example, they can have compassion for that person that they were, that child inside. And that is a beautiful opening, because it makes them really feel like, yeah, I understand now better what was really troubling me, or why I'm acting how I'm acting, or how I'm feeling. And so that starts then unraveling already this flow of positive feelings towards yourself. And especially when you feel anxious or bad, you're realizing, okay, I can have this compassion to the child, and can actually love the child and give the child the love that it didn't have maybe when it grew up. That in itself creates a layer of self-love foundation. And from there, you can then build, and you can observe. One of the observations I always ask people is about, appreciating themselves. Just every day writing down 3 things that they appreciate about themselves. And of course, they always, well, I would say always, but 75% of the people ignore this homework completely. So then I have to say it again, by the way. Then the second round, they have all the appreciations about life and others, but they are not on the list. And then the third time around, then finally they get the hang of it, and they say, okay, now I start appreciating myself. But usually it starts with what they do. I'm certainly one of them. So I did the dishwasher, I cleaned the car, I, picked up the groceries. But then you have to go a step further and ask yourself, so whatever you do here, what does it say about you? What is really the energy, the gift that you are presenting here? Maybe it's commitment, maybe it's caring, maybe it's diligence. And so you're gathering basically information about yourself. You're looking at yourself more as a multidimensional being, a multifaceted being with many, many different facets like a diamond, and you're just learning more and more about those. And that process in itself just increases your value. You feel more a sense of, yeah, I do actually appreciate and value who I am. And from there, going into self-love is much easier than when you start with self-criticism. So to make a long story short, basically, it's not about finding the light switch to self-love. It's about gently nourishing our ability to love ourselves. First through acceptance, then through compassion, then through appreciation, then through also working on inner identities, changing those limiting beliefs. And one of the fun homeworks is also asking people that love you what they love about you. And often people are just moved to tears by hearing other people say all these wonderful things about them. And they want to, I didn't know that they see me this way. I didn't know that this is really who I am for them. And that's another opening that just makes you feel, okay, I do actually have the ability, and I know that I can love myself. And eventually you just feel it. This is maybe not like the exciting falling in love that you have with your spouse, but it's a maybe even more deep way of connecting, because it really is becoming your new identity. It becomes just your new default setting. And of course, sometimes you forget, and then you slap yourself again, but that's just how we are.
Well, and I want to share my personal experience, because of course you and I go back a couple of years ago. I came to you. You were my therapist back in 2014, I believe. And one of the things that we worked on was this learning to love myself. And so for me, I wanted to share it because I want to show it's not something that, that can maybe happen within one day. You know, for me, it's a journey, and it takes, you know, it's been now 3 years. And I have actually come to the point where, you know, what you just said, that it's not this sort of fiery love that you fall in love with yourself and you just swoon every time you look in the mirror. But, but it came to a point of actually acceptance, where before it was a judgment, then it came to a point where, oh my God, I'm okay with you being me, you know, or me being you. You know, it's that kind of acceptance. And to me, that was a point where I felt that I loved myself. And it's still, you're absolutely right. You know, there are days when I slap myself, and then, but it, more and more, it's just a different approach to just being me. And it's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I think the love that you have for your children is a little bit similar, because it's not a fiery, passionate love, but it's a love that will never go away, and you will always be their mother, and you will always know that they have your back, and you will always
Absolutely.
find many things that you find like, oh, and then it's many things that you find like, oh, they are wonderful. And that's the same thing with us. You know, it's just it's a continuum of love, that self-love that just is supposed to be always there. And we have the ability. I mean, loving our children is just one way of knowing. We have the ability to have that committed love. Now we just have to remember to do it for ourselves. And we were loved. I mean, many of us, maybe not all, feel like that they were ever loved by their parents, but many of us know maybe the parents were not necessarily the best parent, but there was certainly still a love that just is there. And whatever they could do in regards to loving, they gave it, and it doesn't go away. So we know it exists, and we know it's something really powerful, and we just have to give ourselves permission to give it to ourselves. It's very often just that choice. Okay, let's turn it inside. Let's turn it towards ourselves and see how that feels.
And yes, you mentioned the homeworks. I remember those. The homework with, and I was laughing because I remembered the homework with what you appreciate about yourself.
Right.
Yeah, at the beginning, it's the hardest thing to do. Because it's like, well, I'm just doing my thing, you know, what else is there to appreciate? But we really don't focus on ourselves as, you know, from sort of, we so live inside our heads that we don't really notice or, you know, understand the things that we're capable of, or that we even do on a daily basis, that are lovable and that are worth appreciating.
Well, and we take ourselves for granted, you know. It's
Absolutely.
often people say, like you just said, you know, I'm just doing my thing, but your thing is very unique and special. You make a difference today. Or people say, isn't that like normal? Isn't that what everyone does? So it's not really unique, with the idea that you can only appreciate something very special. You know, if you find the cure of cancer, well, then you can appreciate yourself. I mean, the simple things are usually those that make all the difference, because those are the things that we really show up day in and day out. And there's a lot of reason to appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk to you now about anxiety a little bit. I heard you speak about anxiety as being, as affecting women probably at a higher rate right now than men. Can you talk about why that is?
Well, you know, I'm still not really sure that this is true. I know that women have certainly struggled with anxiety, you know, maybe in the last 20 years more, for different reasons. One of them is the reason that there are just these unrealistic demands on women. You know, the demand of having to basically still doing all the traditional roles of a woman, having a child, taking care of the household, ironing the underwear, whatever, but then they have to have a job, a career, which is expected, because who just wants to be a housewife, which is almost like an insult these days. And then they have to look good, and they can never age, and certainly not have one, you know, ounce of extra weight. I mean, it's just, you know, ridiculous. It's just there's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of ignorance in regards to how a woman is seen as an individual. It's very much generalized, and I think that has probably, you know, created more anxiety in women over the last 20 years, of course, there's a lot of pressure on men too. But I think women are also much more willing to express that they're feeling anxious or
Right.
depressed than men, who are more in that role of, they have boys don't cry and don't show your emotions and just, keep on going, and you have to be strong. And so it may be that both are equally suffering, but one is more vocal than the other. But the fact is that I believe that the way we are living right now, high paced, very much, constantly with screens and some internet connection in the forefront of our minds, and basically always looking for the next thing. And that is a part of evolution that maybe would have taken 1,000 or 10,000 years before, because there's so many changes that are happening. This is when you think about the cavemen, and finally they started building huts, that took a long time. What we are doing nowadays, after 10 years, life looks different, and our minds cannot just keep up with that. It's just our environment is so different that we couldn't really evolve with it. And that in itself brings anxiety, because we just don't know how to operate really in life anymore, because life has changed so much. And we are just at the beginning. I tell you, at some point in 10, 15 years, we'll deal with more artificial intelligence and robots, and that's going to bring up a whole new level of confusion. And then I think we really are dealing with a level of not knowing what to do with all of this, that will require us to center ourselves and find our values and find what's really important about life and about ourselves. And that shouldn't have gone away in the last 20 years. I mean, what was important 1,000 years ago should be still important now. Right.
So let's bring down this anxiety about the robots now. So what are some of the simple things? You already mentioned meditation. There are simple things that we can do to kind of center ourselves and bring down the anxiety and refocus on ourselves. Are there things that you suggest people do?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the anxiety, we want to be aware of the triggers. It's a little bit like if you would every day find a bruise on your leg, and you would have really never paid attention that there is maybe something that you hit yourself at. So you wonder, why is this bruise there? And you never see, like, well, maybe there is a piece of wood that needs to be removed out of your way, because every time you go to the bathroom, you hit yourself in it. Well, you just don't have this bruise. So that's the same with anxiety. We need to be aware of what makes this anxiety or the fear basically come to the forefront over and over again. So these can be external factors, but very often maybe the external factors that are triggering internal responses, like negative thoughts. So what I suggest often is just to get a piece of paper or a little booklet and just write down randomly any kind of negative thought that you associate with anxiety or fear as they are coming up. That gives you so much information already. It tells you what your subconscious is thinking. It tells you the perceptions your subconscious has on you and the world. It may help you to backtrack to where it comes from, because it reminds you of maybe when you were little and started, going to kindergarten, or whatever those, associations that really spontaneously happen are. And this way you can actually not only learn more about also the beliefs that you have taken on, but you can also start connecting to that child that may sit inside of you still being scared. So writing down the thoughts, looking at the connection with the past, and then imagining, okay, let's go to that child in kindergarten and see what he or she is afraid of and what's really going on. And then having an inner communication started with that anxious part that you can visualize as a child. I mean, that's for so many people already a breakthrough, because they go into that mentorship role. And that's what I like about, working consciously with the subconscious, that it's a much more effective way to rewiring or repatterning our minds. Because the past, for example, just like the now or the future, they're not written in stone. It's a matter of perception. So if you go into a situation where you were bullied and you help that anxious younger self to realize, well, you got bullied because this kid that bullied you got always beaten up by his father. So his bottled up aggression, he just needed to find a victim to get it out of him. But ultimately he was victimized as well. And then all of a sudden you can have a little compassion for that kid that bullied you. Everything is changing. Your whole perception is changing. And that is the beauty about this going back process, that you can really find resolution and peace, and also a lot to learn from the past, even though it has happened a long time ago. There's still a lot of rich information and a lot of momentum that you can gain from the past.
Right. Beautiful. And as our viewers hopefully will take up that advice and write down, the negative thoughts and fears that are coming up, we have a Facebook group set up, and I invite them also to all of you to share those, because I think we'll find that we have a lot of common anxieties and fears floating around in our society. So I want to, before we finish in a few minutes, I want to kind of really shift gears, because there's something that, again, it's a personal experience, and I wanted to share it with our viewers, because again, I met you about 3 years ago, and I came to you for actually for fear of public speaking. I wanted to cure that. But the reason I want to share that is because I want to talk about synchronicities. Because, as you know, throughout the year that I worked with you, I was actually going through a very profound personal shift. And at the end of that year, my husband passed away. And looking back at that experience, I realized that even though I thought I was coming to you for a certain, help with a certain condition, that was not really why I was there. And you were actually the person, and I don't know if you know that or not, but you were the person who actually helped prepare me for my husband's transition and for that whole, for that whole year. And in fact, when he passed away, I felt that there was a completion in our work together, because I felt like, oh, I'm good now, I can move on. Or at least there was I wasn't good. There was a certain completion to the process. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I find it fascinating that, when you begin to really move with the flow of life, that there are these synchronicities that happen, and people come into your life that you may have no idea what role they will play in your life, but they really come in for a reason. And you can see the patterns maybe after the fact. So have you had experiences with synchronicities, in your life, or maybe with your clients, where things kind of click together and then you find out why?
No, it's really interesting that you mentioned this, because, I feel that often people come to me for, a specific symptom or challenge, but they find out there is something else, there's something more important that they need to address. And I remember there was a client of mine who basically also had trouble with her kids and insecurity and things like that. And, digging a little bit deeper, we, basically unearthed an event where she was molested by a guest that was staying in the bed and breakfast her mother was running. And something that she always had a little, pushed aside, not really wanted to think about. And so she really worked on that. And a lot of anger came out at this man who happened to be actually a public figure. And she could, follow him, on the news. And she just really felt like all this, emotional bottled up energy coming up. But that was also then released, and it was she was able in the process to forgive. She was able in the process to really also see that, this man had a lot of pain and a lot of confusion and was very tormented, and she could let him go, and she could, forgive this energy. And the next day after this process, he had died. He had died from a heart attack. And she read it in the newspaper, and she, called me up and said, guess what? This person that, we just worked on, he moved on. And I don't know if this is synchronicity or if, this is something also where maybe this letting go allowed him to let go. It was just a really, really fascinating process that, I think it reminds me a little bit of our work together there, that there is just something about also the ripple effect our work has. Other ripple effects are maybe not about death. They, I often work with clients on them, their ability to love themselves. Mm-hmm. And what's so fascinating is that their spouses are picking up on that. There is nothing they do differently, but the spouses are all of a sudden just maybe having a greater sense of, respect or appreciation for that person that has been working with me. And, one spouse was someone who pretty much ignored his wife all, the time. And then she worked on really gaining more of that self-love. And one day she said, I think my husband, I know what happened, but he bought, she was all in fitness and did some triathlons, but he bought a juicing machine, and now we are eating vegetarian food and we are juicing together, and he wants to run with me, and things he never did before. And she didn't prompt him to do that. It was just that adjustment on, what her energy was like. His energy was kind of, just adjusting to that. And I think that's where we can also be, for people that are saying, oh, I shouldn't work on myself because, this is selfish, self-centered, so much other stuff to do. Actually, you do a lot for others as well when you gain a greater sense of peace, love, and happiness, because it ripples out into your life and it changes those around you. So it's definitely a process that's not only for you, but also for everyone that you really get in touch with.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. So, Dr. Schaub, we're almost at the end of our time. We are actually at the end of our time. So I want to ask you, what are you up to these days? Is there anything you want to bring to the attention of our viewers? They will, of course, have the links to your website, but is there anything else that's fun that's happening that you want to bring to their attention?
Yeah, there are three things that I really love to share. One is I have a radio show that's called Empowerment Radio. It's every first and third Wednesday at 11 to noon Pacific Standard Time. And you can find the link on the website, thefearandanxietysolution.com, which will get a whole new face in the next week or two. So if you want to check it out now or then in 2 weeks again, it will look totally different, which I'm very excited about. And part of that facelift is also that I'm offering a video seminar that is an on-demand video seminar, because a lot of people say, well, I love your work, but maybe I cannot afford individual sessions. So what I put together is a six sessions video seminar. Each session is 90 minutes long. And basically you can go through a step-by-step process, and you get homework and you get things to do. And you can always email me in between with any questions. That really helps you to unravel your fear and anxiety and build that foundation we talked about of confidence and self-love. And since there will be a new website, it will be also given at a very special price. So check it out. I think you can benefit from it a lot.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Dr. Schaub, it's been a pleasure connecting with you again and hearing your wisdom and your gentleness. I really appreciate you talking to us and sharing your wisdom with us. I think it's wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much. It's amazing how fast time goes. It felt like 10 minutes, and I think it was an hour or something like that.
I know. I'm trying to keep to the time, but it's just, I had too many things to ask you. So again, thank you.
Thank you.